My parents banned me and my two kids from Christmas dinner. My mother actually told me that my toddler's messy clothes and my single mom aesthetic would ruin the wealthy image they needed to project for my sister's new millionaire boyfriend. I said I understood perfectly and hung up the phone. What they did not know was that the luxury ski lodge they planned to impress him with was about to fall through, and the $8 million Aspen estate they would desperately try to crash belonged to the very same single mom they just discarded. My name is Natalie, and I am 34 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who only valued you when it benefited them, or if you have ever had to stand up to parents who favored one child over another. Growing up, I was always the outcast, but nothing prepared me for the phone call I received 3 days before Christmas. Listen to me carefully, Natalie, my mother Brenda said, her voice dripping with that familiar condescension. You and the kids are not coming to Aspen for Christmas this year. It is just not going to work out. I stood in the massive chef kitchen of my penthouse, wiping down the marble counter, and let out a small breath. Not going to work out. Mom, it is December 22nd. The kids have been talking about opening presents with their grandparents for weeks. Well, you will just have to buy them a new toy and tell them plans changed, she snapped impatiently, completely devoid of empathy. Your sister Brittany is bringing Harrison. He is a senior executive at a massive investment fund, Natalie. He comes from real money. He is used to high society, not chaotic toddlers running around with sticky hands and spilling juice on expensive rugs. So my children are a liability to your holiday aesthetic, I said, keeping my tone completely flat and devoid of the hurt she was hoping to hear. Do not put words in my mouth, but yes, frankly, you are a liability. We need to project a certain image, a successful, flawless family image. Harrison expects perfection, and your whole single mom struggling to get by vibe is just depressing. It will ruin the mood for everyone. You know how hard we have worked to get Brittany into these circles? Brenda continued, oblivious to the cruelty of her own words. We spent over $100,000 on her fashion degree in Paris so she could mingle with the right caliber of men. We invested in her future. You, on the other hand, threw your life away the second you got pregnant and decided to raise two kids on your own. You made your bed, Natalie. You cannot expect us to let your messy life drag down your sister's one chance at securing a wealthy husband. I see, I replied. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment, looking out over the glittering city skyline. I did not shed a single tear. I had stopped crying over my mother's rejection a long time ago. We rented a stunning luxury cabin in the mountains. She bragged, her tone lifting as she thought about the facade she was building. It cost an absolute fortune, but we had to do it to match Harrison's lifestyle. I cannot have your kids breaking things we cannot afford to replace, and I cannot have you sitting around looking exhausted in last year's sweaters while Brittany is trying to secure a proposal. You want to pretend to be a family of old money elites, I summarized calmly. And the single mother with two kids does not fit the brochure you are trying to hand him. Exactly. I am glad you are finally being mature about this. Brenda sighed, sounding relieved that I was not putting up a fight. Just stay home, order a pizza, and watch a movie with the kids. We will call you after the holidays when Harrison is gone. Do not text Brittany. She is highly stressed about making everything perfect. I looked down at the diamond tennis bracelet on my wrist, a gift I bought myself after closing a $50 million commercial real estate deal last month. Then I looked at the finalized itinerary for the private jet I chartered for my kids. I understand perfectly, Mom, I said, a slow, icy smile spreading across my face. I hope you and Brittany get exactly the Christmas you deserve. Thank you, Natalie. Bye now, she chirped gleefully, and the line went dead. I tossed my phone onto the counter completely unfazed. My phone barely had time to settle on the marble island before it buzzed again. This time, the caller ID displayed the name of my executive assistant, Ben. I tapped the screen and put him on speaker, picking up my coffee mug. Good morning, Madam C. Oh, Ben said, his voice brisk and professional over the background noise of our corporate headquarters. I just received the signed documents from the legal team. The hostile takeover of Vanguard Financial is officially complete. You are now the majority shareholder, and their executive board is practically shaking in their custom Italian leather shoes. They are begging for a meet and greet after the holidays. Excellent work, Ben, I replied, taking a slow sip of my dark roast coffee. Vanguard Financial was a massive investment fund, the exact firm where my sister's supposedly wealthy new boyfriend Harrison worked as a senior director. It was a minor detail in my overall portfolio, but a highly entertaining coincidence nonetheless. Tell their board they can sweat it out until January 2nd. I am officially on vacation mode. Have the restructuring contracts finalized by the time I get back. We will be doing a massive sweep of their upper management. Understood, Ben said, typing rapidly on his end of the line. And speaking of your vacation, the flight logistics are fully locked in. Your private Gulfstream is fueled and waiting at the private terminal. The flight crew is expecting you and the children at 2:00 sharp. I also spoke with the estate manager in Aspen. The house is fully staffed, the Christmas trees are decorated exactly to your specifications, and the private chef has already stocked the pantry with Leo and Mia's favorite snacks. Thank you, Ben, I said, feeling the heavy tension in my shoulders completely melt away. The $8 million Aspen estate was my absolute crown jewel. I purchased it 3 years ago under a blind trust, totally shielding it from the public eye, and more importantly from my family's greedy radar. It sat on 2 acres of pristine snow-covered mountainside boasting a private indoor theater, a heated infinity pool overlooking the valley, and enough space to breathe without the suffocating weight of my mother's constant judgment. Are you sure you do not want me to send a luxury car for your parents? Ben asked carefully. He knew my chaotic family dynamic better than anyone. He had spent the last 5 years fielding unhinged phone calls from my mother, demanding VIP access to exclusive corporate events she had absolutely no business attending. Not this year, Ben. My mother just uninvited me from their Christmas plans, I said, leaning against the counter and looking out at the sprawling city below. Apparently, my single mom aesthetic does not align with the billionaire image they are desperately trying to project for my sister's new boyfriend. Ben let out a dry, incredulous laugh through the speaker. They're lost, Natalie. They have absolutely no idea who they just uninvited. No, they really do not. I smiled genuinely. Have a Merry Christmas, Ben. Take the rest of the week off. You certainly earned it. I ended the call and walked down the expansive hallway of my penthouse toward the kids' brightly lit playroom. Leo, who was 5, and Mia, who was 3, were busy building a massive tower out of wooden blocks. My live-in nanny Maria was patiently helping them sort the colors. They were happy, healthy, and completely oblivious to the toxic family politics that had just played out. Hey, monkeys! I called out, crouching down as they both abandoned their towering creation and ran to tackle me in a massive, joyful hug. Who is ready to go fly on an airplane and see the snow? Me, Leo chanted loudly, jumping up and down on the soft rug. Snowman. Mia babbled, clapping her tiny hands together in pure excitement. That is right, we are going to build the biggest snowman ever. I laughed, scooping her up and kissing her warm cheek. Maria, please make sure their heavy winter gear is packed securely. We are leaving for the airport in exactly 1 hour. As Maria nodded and began gathering their things, I walked into my massive walk-in closet to grab my own luggage. My mother's cruel words echoed in my mind for a brief, fleeting second. You threw your life away. A single mom struggling to get by. I looked around at the racks of designer clothes, the rows of expensive shoes, and the secure wall safe holding the deeds to over 24 highly profitable commercial properties across the country. I had built an absolute empire out of the bitter ashes of their relentless rejection. When my father flatly refused to co-sign my very first business loan because he needed the cash to buy my spoiled sister a luxury sports car, I did not break down and cry. I hustled. I worked brutal 80-hour weeks. I built Apex Holdings from a tiny, struggling startup into a ruthless real estate juggernaut. My parents desperately wanted to play pretend in a rented cabin to impress a man who technically worked for me. Let them. I zipped up my overnight bag with a satisfying click. My children and I were going to have a perfect, peaceful holiday in a sprawling mansion I actually owned. We headed down to the private garage loaded into my waiting armored SUV and drove toward the airfield, completely unbothered by the family that mistakenly thought They had just left us out in the cold. While my children and I settled into the warmth of our mountain sanctuary, my family was landing in their own personal nightmare. It was the afternoon of Christmas Eve, and the temperature in Aspen had dropped to a bitter 15 degrees. The icy wind howled through the snow-covered pines as my father Richard pulled their rented SUV into the steep driveway of a stunning timber-frame chalet. My mother Brenda sat in the passenger seat, aggressively tapping her manicured nails against her designer handbag. In the back sat my sister Brittany, already fixing her lip gloss in the mirror, along with my older brother Jason and his girlfriend Naomi. Naomi was a sharp, brilliant corporate lawyer who had been dating Jason for 6 months. She was entirely out of his league, and sitting quietly in the back of the freezing vehicle, she was already beginning to suspect she had made a massive mistake spending the holidays with my family. "Go punch in the code," Richard Brenda ordered, waving her hand toward the front door. "Harrison is flying in tomorrow morning, and I need to make sure the caterers have the fridge fully stocked before he gets here. Everything must be absolutely flawless tomorrow." My father trudged through the heavy snow and punched a sequence of numbers into the electronic keypad on the heavy oak door. It flashed an angry red. He tried again. Red. He aggressively jiggled the handle, but the door remained completely locked. "What is taking so long?" Brittany whined, rolling down her window and letting a blast of freezing air into the car. "My toes are literally going numb, and my boots are not made for this weather." "The code is not working, Brenda," my father shouted over the howling wind. "Call the property manager right now." Muttering under her breath, my mother pulled out her phone and dialed. As she spoke, the smug confidence on her face began to violently crack. Her pale skin drained of all remaining color. "What do you mean the reservation was canceled?" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the quiet mountain road. "I booked this property 3 months ago. You cannot just lock us out on Christmas Eve." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. "Declined," my mother gasped, clutching her chest in horror. "That is totally impossible. Try the platinum card." "Well then try the other one. There must be a system error. We traveled all the way from Boston." The call ended abruptly. Brenda slowly lowered her phone, her hands shaking violently. "They canceled the booking," she whispered, staring blankly ahead through the windshield. "My credit cards were declined. All of them. The host reported a failure to authorize the final payment. We have nowhere to stay tonight." The inside of the SUV went dead silent. Then Brittany completely exploded. "Are you joking?" she screamed, kicking the back of my mother's seat. "You are actually joking right now." "Harrison arrives in less than 18 hours. He thinks we own a luxury ski lodge. Where are we supposed to put him? In a cheap motel. He will dump me the second he sees we are broke. My entire life is completely ruined now." Brittany broke into hysterical theatrical sobs, burying her face in her hands. My father slammed his fists against the steering wheel, cursing loudly while my mother scrambled through her purse, desperately searching for another credit card. She had not completely maxed out to fund Brittany's fake wealthy lifestyle. Naomi sat in the back, silently observing the absolute meltdown. She adjusted her luxury winter coat and looked at Jason, waiting for him to step up and handle the crisis like a man. Instead, Jason nervously rubbed his hands together. "Wait a minute," Jason said, his eyes suddenly lighting up with a terrible idea. "Natalie said she was bringing her kids to Aspen for the holidays, right? She is probably staying in some crappy cheap cabin in the woods or a budget rental. She always settles for much less. We are not staying in some filthy, low-class shack with screaming toddlers." Brittany spat, her expensive mascara running down her flushed cheeks. "Harrison will be absolutely disgusted." "We do not have a choice, Brittany," my mother snapped. "We will just tell Harrison that we wanted an authentic family experience this year. It is better than sleeping in the car. Jason, get the address. We will just show up." "She cannot turn us away on Christmas Eve. It is family. I do not have to call her," Jason said smugly, pulling out his phone. "I still have her location shared on my phone from last year. I am pulling up the exact address right now. Let us go crash her cheap little holiday tonight." The drive up the winding mountain road took 20 minutes, but the tension inside the rented SUV made it feel like hours. The heavy snow battered the windshield as my father navigated the treacherous ice, following the glowing blue dot on Jason's phone screen. My mother sat with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, still muttering about the audacity of the rental company and how she was going to sue them for emotional distress. Brittany was aggressively refreshing her social media feeds, complaining she could not post anything without looking like a homeless person. They expected the GPS to lead them to the run-down outskirts of town, perhaps to a tiny log cabin tucked behind a discount grocery store. Instead, Jason directed my father toward the most exclusive, heavily guarded peak in all of Aspen. "Turn left, up ahead," Jason said, his voice dropping into a confused whisper. "It should be right here." My father slammed on the brakes. The SUV slid slightly on the black ice before coming to a halt in front of a pair of massive, imposing wrought iron gates that stood over 10 feet tall, blocking their path completely. Beyond the frosted metal bars stood a breathtaking 2-acre estate. The mansion was a masterpiece of modern alpine architecture, constructed from custom-cut stone and floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass that glowed warmly against the darkening winter sky. A perfectly plowed, heated driveway swept upward toward a grand entrance flanked by towering, snow-covered pines. It looked exactly like an impenetrable fortress built for modern royalty. "Your phone is broken, Jason," my mother snapped, glaring out the window. "This is Billionaire's Row." Natalie could not even afford the landscaping bill for a place like this. "I am telling you, this is the exact GPS coordinate she shared," Jason argued, tapping his screen furiously. "Maybe she is house-sitting for someone. Or maybe she is trespassing to take pictures for her kids. You know how desperate she gets." Before my mother could suggest calling the police to have me arrested for squatting, a hidden security camera, mounted on the stone pillar, pivoted, focusing directly on the SUV license plate. A second later, a heavy mechanical click echoed through the freezing air. The massive iron gates slowly swung open, inviting them inside. My father hesitated, gripping the steering wheel. "Drive, Richard," my mother ordered, her eyes widening with a sudden greedy calculation. "If she is house-sitting for some rich boss, we can just crash here. Whoever owns this place definitely has top-tier champagne and enough bedrooms to impress Harrison tomorrow." They drove slowly up the sweeping heated driveway, their mouths hanging open at the sheer scale of the property. The SUV came to a stop near the grand entrance, parking next to my custom-armored black car. As the engine cut off, the heavy oak front door of the mansion opened. I stood on the threshold, wearing a luxurious cashmere lounge set, holding a steaming mug of cocoa. I looked down at them with a calm, completely unbothered expression. My family scrambled out of the freezing car, slipping on the pristine stone walkway. My mother immediately began marching toward me, her face twisting into a demanding scowl, fully prepared to berate me and take over whatever space she believed I was temporarily occupying. But Naomi stepped out of the vehicle and completely froze. She did not look at my mother. She did not look at Jason. She stood perfectly still in her designer winter coat, her sharp, intelligent eyes scanning the unique architectural details of the stone pillars, the specific layout of the heated driveway, and the distinct crest etched into the frosted glass of the front door. Her breath hitched in the icy air. As a top-tier corporate lawyer who handled acquisitions for the most elite clients in the country, Naomi possessed a photographic memory for high-value real estate contracts. Naomi slowly turned her head and looked directly at me. The annoyance on her face vanished, replaced by absolute staggering shock. She ignored my mother, who was halfway up the steps, and spoke loudly enough to cut right through the howling wind. "Wait," Naomi said, her tone commanding total silence. She pointed a trembling finger at the estate, then directly at me. "Your terrible family specifically told me you lived in a slum. They told me you were a broke single mother just barely scraping by." Naomi took a slow step forward, her brown eyes wide with sudden realization. "I just processed the title deed for this exact $8 million Aspen estate for my law firm's top corporate client last week." She paused, letting the heavy silence fall over the driveway before delivering the final blow. "You are the CEO." The heavy silence that followed Naomi's revelation hung in the freezing air for exactly 2 seconds. Anyone with a shred of decency or normal human awareness would have felt an overwhelming wave of embarrassment. A normal family would have apologized, or at least expressed genuine surprise at my massive success. but my family was far from normal. Instead of absorbing the fact that they had spent years mocking a billionaire real estate mogul, my mother simply rolled her eyes. She completely brushed past Naomi, shivering in her designer coat, and marched directly up the stone steps toward me. "Move out of the doorway," Natalie, my mother, snapped, shoving past my shoulder and barging straight into the grand foyer. "It is freezing out here, and I am not catching pneumonia just because you want to stand around playing some sort of dramatic guessing game. Richard, bring the bags inside." My father did not hesitate. He completely ignored the staggering bomb Naomi had just dropped, grabbed 2 heavy suitcases from the trunk, and stomped up the steps. Brittany scurried in right behind him, her teeth chattering loudly as she looked around the magnificent entryway with wide, greedy eyes. Jason hesitated on the driveway for a brief moment, looking nervously between Naomi and me, but his spineless nature won out. He quickly abandoned his girlfriend in the cold and hurried inside to join the rest of the pack. Naomi simply shook her head in sheer disgust and walked up the steps at her own deliberate pace. Her eyes locked onto mine with a mixture of professional respect and deep pity. I closed the heavy oak door behind them, shutting out the howling winter storm. The massive foyer was heated from beneath the polished marble floors. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm and expensive glow over the custom art pieces lining the walls. My mother stood in the center of the room, her high heels clicking aggressively against the stone as she took in the sheer wealth surrounding her. Her face twisted from initial awe into a mask of deep, furious entitlement. "So you are rich," my mother said, crossing her arms over her chest and glaring at me as if my success was a personal insult to her very existence. "You have been hiding all of this money from your own flesh and blood while we had to struggle to rent a cabin. That is incredibly selfish, Natalie. After everything we have done for you, this is how you repay us." I took a slow sip of my hot cocoa, letting the sweet warmth contrast with the absolute ice in the room. "What exactly have you done for me, Mom?" I asked calmly. "You told me 3 days ago that my children and I were a liability and uninvited us to Christmas." "Do not change the subject," my father interrupted, dropping the suitcases heavily onto my pristine floors. "If you really are the CEO of some massive company, then you owe us. We raised you. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. You would be absolutely nothing without the work ethic we instilled in you. It is practically criminal that you would sit on an $8 million estate while your sister was stressing over her future." Brittany had already discarded her wet coat onto a velvet antique chair and was busy admiring her reflection in a gold-framed mirror. "Oh my gosh, this place is actually perfect!" Brittany squealed, completely ignoring the tension in the room. "Harrison will be completely obsessed with this house. We can tell him we bought it together as a family investment property." "Are you completely insane?" Naomi finally spoke up, stepping forward and dropping her own overnight bag onto the floor. She stared at my parents and siblings like they were a bizarre science experiment. "She just told you that you are not welcome here. She owns this property. You cannot just break into her house and demand to use it to impress some guy." "This is family business," Naomi, my mother, snapped viciously. "You are just a girlfriend and do not get a say." She turned her attention back to me, eyes narrowing with determination. "Listen very carefully, Natalie. Harrison arrives tomorrow. He comes from wealth and Brittany needs this proposal. Our rental fell through because of a bank error. We are staying here. We are using this house. You will keep your kids hidden and you will help us. You owe your sister this favor. You have plenty of bedrooms. If you care about this family at all, you will stop being bitter and do exactly what I say. Do not ruin this massive opportunity for us." "We are moving in right now," she demanded coldly. I stared at my mother, watching the absolute audacity radiate from her rigid posture. A few hours ago, she had casually tossed my children and me aside to protect her precious aesthetic. Now she was standing in my foyer demanding the keys to my kingdom. My hand drifted toward the security panic button discreetly built into the marble console table. One press and my armed guards would drag them back out into the blizzard. I was opening my mouth to give the order when a single detail from her unhinged rant echoed in my mind. "Harrison. She said he worked at a massive investment fund. My morning phone call with my assistant Ben suddenly flashed in my memory. The hostile takeover of Vanguard Financial. The executive board shaking in their custom Italian leather shoes. I let my hand drop away from the security button. I looked directly at my sister, who was busy running her hands over a priceless silk tapestry. "What is Harrison's last name?" I asked, keeping my voice completely neutral. Brittany rolled her eyes. "Caldwell," she stated proudly. "Harrison Caldwell. He is a senior director at Vanguard Financial. He manages portfolios worth more than you will ever see in your lifetime. We told him our family has a massive real estate empire, and he is very eager to see this property. Vanguard Financial. Harrison Caldwell." A slow, dangerous thrill washed over me. I did not just know Harrison Caldwell. As of 8 o'clock this morning, I owned the entire company he worked for. I was literally his ultimate boss. The man my family was desperately trying to impress was currently terrified of the ruthless CEO, who had just orchestrated the takeover of his firm. He had absolutely no idea that CEO was me. They were about to build their entire house of cards on a foundation that I personally controlled. Naomi, still standing quietly near the door, caught the slight shift in my expression. As a high-level corporate attorney, her sharp legal mind instantly detected the trap I was preparing to spring. She looked at the expensive marble floors, then at my completely calm demeanor, and she knew. She crossed her arms, a tiny, knowing smirk playing on her lips, choosing to remain completely silent and watch the inevitable carnage unfold. I looked back at my mother. The furious entitlement on her rigid face was almost comical now that I held every single advantage. She was demanding a grand stage to perform her pathetic, desperate play, and I suddenly decided to give her exactly what she wanted. Why throw them out into the cold when I could watch them burn themselves to the ground in my dining room? I wanted to see just how deep they would dig their own graves. "Fine," I said softly, the single word echoing in the massive stone foyer. My mother blinked clearly, taken aback by my sudden surrender. "What did you just say?" she asked suspiciously. "I said fine," I repeated. My voice was smooth, laced with a venom they were entirely too arrogant to notice. "You want to use my house. You want to pretend this is your luxury estate. You want to play the part of a billionaire family to impress Harrison Caldwell. I will allow it." Brittany let out a loud shriek of excitement. "Oh my gosh, finally you are being useful. Which one is the master bedroom? I need the biggest closet for my outfits." I held up a single finger, stopping her. "But there are rules. If you are going to claim my life as your own, you have to sell it. You cannot break character. Harrison is a smart man from the corporate world. He will see right through you if you falter. I will give you the guest wing on the east side of the house. I will instruct my private chef to prepare a 5-star dinner tomorrow night. But you will have to prove you belong in a house like this. Let us see how well you play the part." My father puffed out his chest, completely missing the trap. "Do not worry about us, Natalie. We know how to act with class. You just make sure you stay out of sight." "Oh, I will be around," I smiled. After all, a house this massive needs staff to keep it running smoothly. I will play the quiet, obedient housekeeper you have always wanted me to be. I will serve the food and pour the wine. You will get the flawless family image you wanted." My mother narrowed her eyes, but her greed blinded her logic. "Good," she said sharply. "Make yourself useful." As they hurried off to claim their rooms, Naomi lingered behind. She walked past me, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "You are going to completely destroy them, are you not?" Naomi asked, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. I took another sip of my cocoa. "I am just giving them the Christmas they asked for, Naomi." Naomi offered a slow nod before walking down the wide hallway to the guest wing. She knew better than to interfere. I stood alone in the grand foyer for exactly 10 seconds before the sharp clicking of heels echoed against the marble. Brittany marched back into the entryway, completely bypassing the custom mudroom, deliberately tracking melted snow across my pristine stone floors. She stopped in front of me and unbuttoned her heavy designer winter coat. Without warning, she tossed the soaking wet garment directly at my face. I caught the heavy wool fabric, the icy moisture immediately soaking into my warm cashmere sweater. "Hang that up somewhere out of sight," Brittany commanded, waving her manicured hand, "and wipe up this floor. Wipe up this. It is getting terribly slippery, and I cannot risk twisting my ankle before Harrison arrives. I need to be in perfect physical condition for my proposal. He is taking me skiing, and I need to look flawless." I held the damp, freezing coat away from my body, maintaining my neutral expression. "I will have the cleaning staff address the floor," I said, calmly refusing to break the character I had agreed to play. Brittany crossed her arms, shivering slightly in her thin silk blouse, looking around the massive space with greedy eyes. "See that you do. And another thing," she said, her voice dropping into a vicious sneer. "I do not want to see or hear those brats of yours at all tomorrow. Harrison thinks I am an independent, career-driven woman with a sophisticated family. Having your messy toddlers running around screaming will completely ruin the elegant aesthetic I curated for him." I saw a heavy wooden door near the kitchen that looks like it goes down into a storage cellar. "You will keep your kids locked down there until Harrison goes back to the airport. Order them a cheap pizza, but keep them quiet. If I hear one single crying fit or see a single plastic toy in the living room, I will personally make sure Mom cuts you out of the family forever. We are doing you a massive favor by letting you stay here." I looked at my younger sister, absolutely marveling at the sheer depth of her delusion. She was standing in my $8 million mansion, dripping dirty snow onto my custom floors and threatening to exile my children to a basement that did not even exist. She truly believed her own lies. I draped her wet coat over my arm. "My children will not be spending Christmas in a basement, Brittany." I replied, my voice dangerously soft but completely unwavering. "They will be spending the holiday exactly where they are right now, in the private soundproof indoor cinema on the second floor. They have a massive projector screen, heated luxury recliner seating, and a fully stocked private candy bar. The nanny is currently setting up a marathon of their favorite holiday movies. You will not hear a single sound from them tomorrow, not because they are hiding in a dark cellar like you want, but because they are enjoying a level of luxury you have to lie to your boyfriend to experience." Brittany completely froze, the smug superiority wiping off her face in a single instant. Her jaw practically unhinged as her eyes darted toward the sweeping grand staircase. "A private cinema," she repeated, the words tasting like absolute poison on her tongue. Her pale face flushed an ugly shade of red as pure jealousy surged through her veins. "You have an actual private movie theater in this house." She was visibly struggling to comprehend how the sister she had spent her entire life mocking could possess things she could only desperately dream of. "Why do you get a private theater while I have been living in a tiny city apartment trying to save face? It is completely unfair. You do not even appreciate nice things, Natalie. You just waste them on messy toddlers. You should let Harrison and me use the cinema tomorrow night for a private date. Send your kids to the kitchen." I let out a low, humorless laugh. "That is not going to happen, Brittany. You wanted me to play the role of the silent housekeeper, and I agreed. I will cook your meals and serve your wine. But my children are completely off limits, and my private theater belongs strictly to them. Make sure you get your precious beauty sleep, sister. You have a big performance tomorrow." I walked away, leaving Brittany standing alone, her face contorted with bitter envy. I walked away from Brittany, leaving her fuming in the grand foyer, and made my way toward the massive gourmet kitchen. Before I could even push open the swinging door, a firm hand caught my arm. I turned to see Naomi. Her expression was completely unreadable, her dark eyes analyzing me with the intense scrutiny of a prosecutor preparing for cross-examination. "Let us talk," Naomi said softly, nodding toward a secluded corner of the hallway, out of earshot from the guest wing. I led her into my private study, a quiet room lined with floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves and a massive stone fireplace. I closed the heavy door behind us, sealing us in complete silence. Naomi did not bother sitting down. She crossed her arms, her designer coat still draped over one arm, and looked at me squarely. "I handle acquisitions for Apex Holdings." Naomi began, her voice low and precise. "I know the kind of ruthless intellect it takes to build an empire like yours, Natalie. You do not just roll over and play maid for people who treat you like garbage. So tell me the truth. What is really going on here? Because I have spent the last 6 months listening to Jason brag about his trust fund and his incredible family wealth. But today I watched your parents' credit cards get declined at a mid-tier rental, and now they are squatting in your mansion. I walked over to the leather chair behind my desk and sat down, lacing my fingers together. You are a corporate lawyer, Naomi. You deal in facts and ledgers. So let me give you the exact financial breakdown of the family you are currently dating into. Naomi leaned against the bookcase, her eyes narrowing. I am listening. My parents do not have a trust fund, I stated plainly. They do not have a real estate empire. What they had was a very comfortable upper-middle-class retirement account that they completely liquidated 3 years ago. Liquidated for what, Naomi asked her lawyer, instincts fully kicking in. For them, I replied, gesturing generally toward the guest wing. Brittany convinced them she needed $100,000 for a useless degree in Paris so she could catch a rich husband. Then she needed a luxury apartment downtown to maintain her influencer aesthetic. But the real drain was Jason. Naomi stiffened her posture, going completely rigid. Go on. Jason is not a venture capitalist, I explained, watching the painful realization wash over her face. He lost his entry-level finance job 2 years ago. Since then, he has been convincing my parents to take out massive equity loans on their primary house in Boston to fund his failed crypto startups and his luxury car leases. He told them he was on the verge of $1 million payout. Instead, he blew through their entire safety net. The reason my mother's credit cards bounced today is because they are completely maxed out. They are drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. Jason is a broke fraud, Naomi. He has been lying to you since the day you met. Naomi closed her eyes for a long moment. She took a slow, deep breath, maintaining absolute control over her emotions. When she opened her eyes again, the warmth was completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. He told me he bought that Rolex with his first big dividend check, Naomi whispered, her voice laced with pure disgust. He told me he was self-made. I am a partner at a top law firm, and I have been paying for our dinners because he claimed his assets were tied up in aggressive, high-yield portfolios. His assets are tied up in his mother's purse, I corrected gently. And that purse is now completely empty. He is nothing but a parasite feeding off the last scraps of their credit. Naomi let out a sharp, bitter laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. She walked over to the desk and planted both hands on the polished wood, leaning closer to me. She was no longer just Jason's girlfriend. She was a brilliant woman who had just realized she was being conned by a pathetic liar, and she was ready for blood. You agreed to let them stay here and host Harrison Caldwell because you are setting a trap, Naomi stated, connecting the dots with terrifying speed. You own Vanguard Financial. Harrison is your employee. You are going to let them build this massive lie tomorrow night, and then you are going to pull the rug out from under them in front of the very man they are trying to manipulate. I smiled, a slow, genuine smile. That is exactly the plan. Naomi did not hesitate. I want in, she said firmly. Jason thought he could play me for a fool. I want a front row seat when this entire family collapses, and I want to personally hand Jason the final blow. Whatever you need tomorrow, Natalie, you have my complete cooperation. Then we have a deal, I said, standing up and extending my hand. Naomi shook it firmly. The alliance was sealed. My family thought they had successfully hijacked my home, completely unaware that the two smartest women in the house were already orchestrating their absolute destruction. The next morning passed in a whirlwind of frantic preparations. My family scrambled desperately to construct the perfect illusion of old money wealth. Brittany spent 4 hours applying her makeup to achieve a look that screamed effortless luxury. My father rehearsed his fake investment strategies out loud, while Jason tried to properly instructing my actual private chef to instructing my actual private chef to leave the premises before the guests arrived. He had already prepared a flawless 5-course meal, leaving me to simply plate the food and play my role. At exactly 6 o'clock, the security chime echoed through the mansion. A sleek black car rolled up the heated stone driveway. Panic immediately erupted in the grand foyer. He is here! Brittany shrieked, sprinting down the stairs in an evening gown. Everyone get into position. Dad, go stand by the fireplace. My mother burst through the swinging doors, flushed with high-stakes anxiety. She shoved a plain white apron directly into my chest. "Put this on right now," she hissed, her eyes darting around the spotless kitchen. "You are the hired help tonight, Natalie. You do not speak unless spoken to. You keep my wine glass full and serve from the left side. If you drop a single plate or embarrass us in front of Harrison, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your life. Do you understand me?" I calmly unfolded the white apron and tied it around my waist, making sure the fabric completely covered my expensive cashmere sweater. I pulled the sleeve down slightly to conceal the custom diamond Rolex on my wrist. "I understand completely, Mom," I replied, my voice perfectly submissive. "I will make sure tonight is absolutely unforgettable." She gave me one last glaring look before rushing back out to the foyer. I followed a few paces behind, stopping just short of the entryway to watch the grand performance begin. My father pulled open the heavy oak door with a wide, practiced smile. Harrison Caldwell stepped into the warm light of the foyer, brushing a light dusting of snow from his tailored designer overcoat. He was a tall, sharp-looking man in his late 30s, carrying himself with the rigid posture of a corporate executive. I recognized him instantly from his employee file. He was incredibly ambitious, highly intelligent, and completely oblivious to the trap he had just walked into. "Harrison, my boy," my father boomed loudly, extending a hand to pull the younger man inside. "Welcome to our little mountain getaway. It is so wonderful to finally meet the man Brittany has been raving about all these months." Harrison shook my father's hand firmly, his eyes scanning the vaulted ceilings, the custom crystal chandelier, and the priceless artwork lining the stone walls. "You have an absolutely stunning home," Sir Harrison said clearly, impressed by the sheer magnitude of the estate. "Brittany mentioned your family was in real estate, but this property is on a completely different level. The architecture is breathtaking." My mother stepped forward, practically glowing with smug satisfaction. "Oh, you know how it is, Harrison." She laughed lightly, waving her hand, as if owning an $8 million mansion was just a casual inconvenience. "Richard and I have spent decades building our commercial and residential portfolio. It takes an incredible amount of hard work and sacrifice to maintain a lifestyle like this. We bought this property a few years ago as a quiet sanctuary away from our busy corporate lives." "That is exactly right," my father chimed in, puffing out his chest. "You cannot rely on handouts in this world. You have to be ruthless. You have to build your own empire from the ground up. We pride ourselves on our business acumen. We certainly did not get to billionaire's row by making foolish investments." I stood quietly in the shadows of the hallway, smoothing down the front of my white apron. Listening to my bankrupt father brag about his fictional business acumen while standing inside the house I bought with my own hard-earned money was almost too delicious to interrupt. Harrison nodded respectfully, completely buying into the grand illusion. "Let us head into the formal parlor for some drinks," my father suggested, gesturing toward the main living room. "Our new housekeeper has prepared some wonderful hot appetizers for us to enjoy by the fire." Harrison smiled and offered his arm to Brittany, who looked like she might faint from pure joy. They walked past me without a single glance. The stage was perfectly set, the actors were blindly playing their parts, and I was ready to serve the first course of their absolute destruction. I followed them a minute later, carrying a heavy silver tray loaded with seared scallops and caviar blinis. The formal parlor was a massive open space featuring exposed timber beams salvaged from a 19th century French barn and a floor-to-ceiling fireplace built from river stone. It was a masterpiece of modern alpine design. My father, however, was currently treating it like a cheap museum exhibit he had skimmed a travel brochure for. As I quietly entered the room, my father was waving his crystal glass of scotch toward the vaulted ceiling. We actually imported these wooden beams directly from a local lumber yard down the street. My father lied loudly, completely butchering the rich history of the expensive materials. I told the contractor I wanted that rustic cabin feel. You know, something simple and understated. And those stones for the fireplace, well, Brenda and I personally picked them out of a dusty quarry in Texas. Harrison nodded slowly, looking up at the ancient weathered French oak beams that definitely did not come from a local hardware store. He looked mildly confused by the Texas quarry claim, considering we were in the middle of the snowy Colorado mountains, but he remained polite and composed. "It is a very unique blend of styles," Richard Harrison observed tactfully. "You certainly have a bold vision for interior design and construction." Brittany clung tightly to Harrison's arm, giggling as if my father had just said something incredibly witty and profound. "Oh, Daddy is a total visionary," she chimed in, tossing her long, blonde hair over her shoulder. "He has such an eye for expensive things. Wait until you see the artwork we have collected. We are massive art collectors." My father puffed out his chest, emboldened by the ridiculous praise. He walked over to the centerpiece of the room, a stunning, authentic 19th century oil painting I had acquired at an exclusive auction in London. It depicted a stormy maritime scene and was worth more than my parents' entire previous retirement fund combined. "This piece right here is my absolute favorite," my father proclaimed, gesturing grandly toward the priceless canvas. "We bought it during a luxury family trip to Italy a few years ago. It is an original piece by the famous Italian painter, Giovanni Battista. Cost me an absolute small fortune, but you simply cannot put a price tag on true European culture and sophistication." I stepped forward gracefully, lowering the heavy silver tray onto the polished oak coffee table right in front of Harrison. I arranged the linen napkins with practiced precision, making sure to keep my face perfectly serene and my voice entirely respectful. "Actually, sir," I spoke up, my voice calm and crystal clear, cutting effortlessly through my father's absurd fabrication. "The artist is Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot. He was a highly regarded French landscape painter, not Italian, and this specific piece belongs to his late period, characterized by the silvery feathered brushstrokes you see near the horizon line. It is a classic textbook example of the historic Barbizon school movement." The entire room went absolutely dead silent. My father froze in place, his glass of scotch hovering awkwardly near his mouth. Brittany glared at me with such intense, burning hatred I was surprised my white apron did not instantly burst into flames. My mother, sitting stiffly on the velvet sofa, looked like she was about to have a sudden medical emergency. Harrison, however, turned away from the oil painting and looked directly at me. His eyes widened slightly in genuine surprise and deep, undeniable curiosity. He stepped closer to the canvas, inspecting the delicate brushstrokes, exactly where I had confidently pointed out. "You are absolutely right," Harrison said, turning back to look at me with a profound new level of respect. "I studied art history in college, and Corot is one of my absolute favorites. I cannot believe I did not recognize it immediately from across the room." "That is incredibly impressive knowledge for a housekeeper. You certainly know your fine art." I smiled politely, keeping my hands folded neatly in front of my apron. "I am just very passionate about the historical details, sir. Much like the unique architecture of this room. The timber beams above you are actually reclaimed oak from an 1840s estate in Lyon, France, which perfectly complements the thermal mass of the Colorado River stone used in the fireplace. It creates a highly efficient passive heating system for the harsh winter months. I always find it fascinating to learn everything I can about the luxury properties I manage." Harrison stared at me, completely captivated by the effortless and articulate way I had just deconstructed the room. He looked back at my father, whose face was rapidly turning the awful blotchy color of a ripe tomato. "Fascinating," Harrison murmured softly, though he was no longer looking at the vaulted ceiling or the expensive painting. He was looking directly at me. "Well, Richard, you clearly hire top-tier staff to maintain your properties. She knows far more about your beautiful house than you do." My father let out a strained, incredibly awkward laugh, nervously adjusting his shirt collar. "Yes, well, we pay her very well to memorize the property brochures. Thank you for the food, Natalie. You are dismissed to the kitchen now. We will call you when we need our glasses refilled." I offered a crisp, professional nod, turning on my heel. I could feel Harrison's eyes following me intently as I walked away, the heavy seed of doubt now firmly planted in his sharp corporate mind. The grand illusion was already beginning to crack under the pressure, and we had not even made it to the dining room yet. I pushed through the wooden swinging doors, cutting off the low murmur of conversation from the parlor. The massive gourmet kitchen was a sanctuary of pristine white marble. I walked over to the center island and began preparing the next course. My private chef had left perfectly portioned servings of caviar delicate crostinis and tiny bowls of crème fraîche. I arranged them on a chilled silver platter with absolute precision, enjoying the quiet rhythm. It was highly amusing to stand in my own estate wearing a plain apron plating expensive appetizers for an employee. Less than a minute later, the kitchen doors flew open with violent force. Brittany stormed into the room. Her face was flushed with pure rage, the carefully constructed mask of a sophisticated socialite completely shattered. She marched directly toward me. "What exactly are you doing?" Brittany hissed, her voice trembling with fury. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging painfully into my sleeve. "Are you trying to ruin my life?" I looked down at her hand. "Remove your hand, Brittany," I said softly, my voice carrying absolute authority. She snatched her hand back as if she had been burned, but she did not back down. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, her eyes wild with panic and deep-seated jealousy. She looked around the kitchen as if making sure we were entirely alone before unleashing her venom. "You are supposed to be the silent help tonight," she practically spat, pointing a shaking finger directly at my chest. "You do not speak to Harrison. You do not correct Dad in front of him. You do not try to show off your stupid random facts about old paintings. Harrison is a senior director at a massive investment firm. He works with billionaires and industry titans every single day. He likes high-value women, Natalie. He wants a sophisticated partner who belongs in high society, not some pathetic single mom loser who spends her weekends changing diapers and struggling to pay rent." I picked up a small mother-of-pearl spoon and carefully placed a dollop of crème fraîche onto a toasted crostini. Then I added a perfect scoop of the dark glistening caviar. I did not look at her as I spoke, giving the appetizer my full and undivided attention. "If Harrison is as intelligent and successful as you claim, then he can surely recognize a cheap imitation when he sees one," I replied smoothly. Brittany gasped loudly, taking a massive step back, as if I had physically slapped her across the face. "How dare you?" she whispered, her chest heaving with indignation. "I am not an imitation. I belong with a man like him. You are just bitter, because your own life is a complete disaster. You are trying to sabotage me because no wealthy man would ever look twice at a woman with heavy baggage like yours. You are completely jealous that I am the one getting a massive diamond ring tomorrow, while you are stuck wearing an apron and serving my appetizers in the shadows." I placed the last crostini onto the chilled silver platter and finally turned to face my younger sister fully. She was trembling with rage, desperate for my validation, desperate for me to feel small so she could feel big. It was genuinely pathetic to witness. She had built her entire identity around the approval of a man she had been lying to since their very first date. She had no real money, no real career, and absolutely no real class. She was a fragile house of cards waiting for a strong gust of wind. "I am not trying to sabotage you, Brittany," I said, keeping my tone completely level and devoid of any emotion. "I am simply serving the food exactly as Mom demanded I do. If you are terrified that a single sentence about a French painter is going to destroy your entire relationship, then your relationship is already incredibly fragile to begin with." I picked up the heavy silver tray, balancing it easily on one hand with practiced grace. I looked directly into her panicked blue eyes. "I am sure Harrison values authenticity above all else," I stated firmly. "Let us hope he finds some tonight." I walked past her, leaving her standing entirely alone in the massive kitchen. Her face was pale, my words hitting far closer to the terrible truth than she was willing to admit. The delicate facade she had spent months building was beginning to crumble rapidly under the weight of her own massive insecurities. I pushed open the swinging doors and walked back out into the dining room, ready to serve the next delicious course to a man who was rapidly realizing that his wealthy girlfriend was nothing more than a fraud. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and carefully carried the silver tray of fine caviar into the massive formal dining room. The massive mahogany table was beautifully set for 6, glittering with expensive crystal glassware under the warm glow of the chandelier. My father sat at the head of the table, desperately trying to look wealthy. Harrison sat to his right, with Brittany clinging to his side like a desperate accessory. Jason and Naomi sat across from them. Naomi caught my eye, offering a barely perceptible nod. I stepped quietly toward the table and began serving the first course, moving seamlessly behind Harrison to pour a vintage Bordeaux into his empty crystal glass. Brittany was visibly on edge after our brief confrontation. She glared at me as I slowly approached her side of the table. "Watch the glass," she snapped loudly, making sure Harrison was paying attention. Honestly, good help is incredibly hard to find these days. You have to explain the simplest tasks repeatedly. It reminds me of this incompetent assistant I fired last month. She was a pathetic single mother, always distracted, always complaining about her difficult life. I gave her a massive opportunity to work for my lifestyle brand, and she just dragged my whole aesthetic down. People like that simply do not understand what it takes to survive in a high-stakes corporate environment. I kept my face perfectly blank, expertly pouring the dark red wine into her glass. Before I could move away to serve the next person, Naomi leaned forward, resting her elbows gracefully on the polished mahogany table. Her sharp, calculating eyes locked directly onto Brittany. "That is fascinating, Brittany." Naomi said, her tone polite, but laced with razor-sharp precision. "Jason told me so much about your massive success as an influencer, but as a corporate attorney, I find the actual daily business mechanics of digital branding highly intriguing. Tell me, which specific talent management agency currently represents your growing brand portfolio?" Brittany froze her wine glass, halting halfway to her lips. She blinked rapidly, clearly not expecting a rigorous pop quiz on the career she had entirely fabricated. "Oh, well, I actually prefer to remain strictly independent," Brittany stammered, offering a weak laugh. "Agencies take way too much of a percentage, and I like to maintain complete creative control over my aesthetic." Naomi tilted her head slightly, adopting the exact expression she used when dismantling a hostile witness. "I see," Naomi continued smoothly. "But without an agency, managing high-level brand deals must be a logistical nightmare. What is your current engagement rate on sponsored posts?" "Jason mentioned you pull in 6 figures a month, which means your conversion metrics must be absolutely staggering. Who handles your corporate tax structuring for that freelance income?" The color rapidly drained from Brittany's pale face. She looked frantically toward our mother, who suddenly seemed very interested in her caviar. "I do not really deal with the boring math stuff," Brittany deflected her voice, climbing to a defensive pitch. "I have an expensive accountant who handles the numbers. I focus strictly on the creative vision and the networking. Harrison knows how it is. You hire smart people to deal with the minor details." "Actually," Harrison chimed in, looking at Brittany with a slight frown of genuine confusion, "even the most creative founders I work with know their baseline metrics, Brittany. If you are actively generating 6 figures monthly, your tax liability alone would require you to be intimately familiar with your exact corporate structure. Are you registered as an LLC or an S-Corp?" Brittany opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked exactly like a deer caught in headlights. "I am sure it is just a standard LLC." Jason jumped in desperately, trying to save his sister from completely drowning. "Let us not talk about stressful business at the dinner table. We are here to celebrate the holidays." Naomi smiled a cold, victorious smile that did not reach her eyes. "Of course, Jason. I just admire independent businesswomen. It takes a very special kind of person to build an empire from absolute scratch." Naomi paused, her gaze shifting deliberately from the sweating, panicked Brittany directly to me. "Is that not right, Natalie?" I finished pouring the last glass of wine, stepping back from the table with perfect posture. "It certainly requires a level of authenticity that very few people possess." "Miss Naomi," I replied respectfully, playing my role absolutely flawlessly. I retreated to the edge of the dining room, watching the uncomfortable silence smother the table. Harrison was now staring at Brittany, the romantic admiration in his eyes rapidly cooling into deep, analytical suspicion. Their appetizer was barely consumed, and the main course of their destruction was already being served. I returned to the dining room a few moments later, pushing a polished silver cart carrying the main course. The heavy tension from Naomi's relentless interrogation still lingered thick in the air, wrapping around the table like a suffocating blanket. My mother was glaring daggers at Naomi, while Brittany was frantically pretending to fix her flawless makeup in the reflection of her spoon. My father, desperate to regain control of the room and smooth over his golden child's obvious embarrassment, cleared his throat loudly. He shifted his weight in the heavy mahogany chair, steering the conversation completely away from Brittany's non-existent corporate structure and pointing it directly at Harrison. So Harrison, my father, began adopting a deep tone of masculine camaraderie that he always used when trying to sound important. Tell us about the high-stakes investment world. I imagine a man in your senior position deals with incredible levels of stress, especially in today's highly volatile financial market. You must be managing some truly massive accounts. Harrison seemed visibly relieved to discuss something real and grounded. He leaned back in his chair, taking a slow, appreciative sip of his ice water. You have absolutely no idea. Richard Harrison sighed, rubbing the back of his neck with a tired hand. Actually, it has been an absolute nightmare at the firm lately. We just went through a massive, highly aggressive hostile takeover. As of 8 o'clock this morning, Vanguard Financial is no longer an independent entity. We were completely bought out by Apex Holdings. Jason let out a low, impressed whistle, nodding his head, and pretending to fully understand the gravity of corporate acquisitions. I carefully placed a steaming plate of roasted duck breast with cherry reduction in front of my mother, making sure my movements were completely silent and practically invisible. It is not just the buyout that has everyone in the office on edge right now. Harrison continued, his voice dropping slightly, as if he were discussing a highly dangerous predator lurking in the room. It is the CEO of Apex Holdings. She is an absolute ghost in the media, refusing all interviews, but in the boardroom she is known as a terrifying, ruthless genius. She started with a tiny real estate portfolio a few years ago and built a massive empire that completely swallowed us whole in a matter of weeks. Our entire executive board is terrified of her. We know she is planning a massive restructuring right after the holidays, and heads are absolutely going to roll across every single department. Brittany reached out and patted his arm sympathetically, desperate to play the role of the supportive, wealthy girlfriend. Oh, babe, that sounds so incredibly stressful for you. But you are brilliant and work so hard. They would never fire someone with your track record. Harrison shook his head, looking genuinely worried about his impending fate. You do not understand how she operates, Brittany. This CEO does not care about past accomplishments or old money connections. She only cares about absolute perfection, raw intelligence, and flawless execution. I am desperate to secure a brief meeting with her just to prove my value to the new regime, but she is completely unreachable. She is currently spending the holidays at one of her private estates, probably plotting her next billion-dollar acquisition, while the rest of us sweat it out. My father let out a booming, incredibly arrogant laugh that echoed off the expensive mahogany walls. Well, Harrison, my father proclaimed loudly, aggressively slicing into his duck breast. It sounds to me like this new boss of yours could use a little seasoned veteran guidance. These young tech billionaires and real estate hotshots always think they know everything about the world until the market inevitably turns on them. If she ever needs some solid practical advice on how to properly manage a massive portfolio without burning out her top executives, you just send her my way. I would be more than happy to sit her down and teach her a few vital things about the real world of high-level business. I stepped up beside Harrison, a freshly opened bottle of vintage Pinot Noir resting lightly in my hand. I leaned in slightly, keeping my posture perfectly subservient, and began pouring the rich red liquid into his crystal glass. I had to bite the inside of my cheek hard to keep from bursting into hysterical laughter. The sheer blinding arrogance of my bankrupt father offering to mentor the billionaire CEO who currently owned his mortgage and his daughter's boyfriend's entire career was the greatest Christmas gift I could have ever possibly asked for. I glanced across the wide table at Naomi. She had her linen napkin pressed firmly over her mouth, her shoulders shaking slightly as she silently laughed at the incredible, staggering irony of the situation. She locked eyes with me, her dark eyes shining with pure, unadulterated amusement. Harrison nodded politely at my father, completely unaware of the absolute comedy playing out right in front of his face. "I appreciate the offer," Richard Harrison said earnestly, "but I think the only thing this powerful woman needs is complete compliance. If I ever do get the chance to meet her, I just pray I do not do anything foolish to offend her. Because if you get on her bad side, she will not just fire you. She will completely dismantle your entire life without a second thought." I finished pouring his wine without spilling a single drop, stepping back into the quiet shadows of the room with a smooth, deeply hidden smirk. He was absolutely right about that. The dinner progressed. The tension around the mahogany table simmered just below the boiling point. Brittany was drinking her vintage Pinot Noir much faster than anyone else. She was trying to overcompensate for her lack of business knowledge by acting arrogant. She laughed entirely too loudly at my father's corporate jokes and constantly touched Harrison's arm. But I could see the subtle shift in Harrison's body language. He was slowly pulling away his highly analytical mind, quietly evaluating the chaotic family he had just been introduced to. Brittany felt him slipping out of her grasp. She felt the control leaving her hands. She desperately needed a scapegoat to reassert her fragile dominance and prove she was the most important person in the room. I stood near the archway waiting for my cue when Brittany aggressively snapped her fingers at me. "Bring me more wine," she demanded loudly, her voice slurring slightly from the expensive alcohol. "And do not just stand there staring at the walls like a useless statue. You are supposed to be working for us tonight." I kept my face blank and walked slowly toward the table, picking up the heavy glass bottle. As I reached her chair and leaned in to carefully pour the dark red liquid, Brittany suddenly jerked her elbow backward with deliberate, violent force. Her arm slammed directly into my wrist. The heavy crystal wine glass tipped over and shattered against the sharp edge of the mahogany table. A massive wave of dark red wine splashed across the polished wood, completely soaking the front of my white apron and seeping deep into the cashmere sweater underneath. The sharp sound of breaking crystal echoed loudly in the dining room. Naomi immediately pushed her chair back to avoid the spill. Jason let out a surprised gasp and shrank into his seat. My mother sighed loudly, rolling her eyes as if my mere existence was an exhausting burden. But Brittany did not apologize. Instead, she pushed her chair back so aggressively that the wooden legs scraped loudly against the marble floor. She stood up, her face twisted into an ugly mask of pure, intoxicated superiority. "Look what you did, you clumsy idiot," Brittany screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You are completely incompetent. I asked for a simple glass of wine, and you managed to ruin everything. You always ruin everything you touch. This is exactly why you are a pathetic single mother struggling to survive in the real world. You have absolutely no class, no grace, and no idea how to exist in a high-value environment. You are nothing but the hired help tonight, Natalie. It is time you finally learn your place and stop trying to embarrass me. Clean up this mess right now before I have you thrown out into the snow." The entire dining room plunged into a suffocating dead silence. Harrison stared up at Brittany in absolute horror. The delicate mask of the sweet woman he had been dating had completely melted away, revealing the toxic, hateful person hiding underneath. He looked genuinely sick to his stomach at her unprovoked cruelty. My father opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Everyone at the table waited for me to break. They fully expected me to drop to my knees, scrub the floor, and cry silent tears of humiliation. They expected the broken, compliant scapegoat they had spent 34 years conditioning me to be. But I did not cower. I did not apologize. I looked down at the dark red stains spreading across my clothes with absolute indifference. Then I reached behind my waist and slowly untied the strings of the cheap white apron. I pulled the stained fabric over my head and let it drop casually onto the floor right on top of the shattered crystal and spilled wine. I picked up a clean linen towel from the serving cart, calmly wiped my hands free of the moisture, and tossed the towel onto the table. I slowly rolled up the sleeves of my ruined sweater, exposing the custom diamond Rolex gleaming on my wrist. I straightened my spine, letting my shoulders pull back into the rigid, commanding posture I used when negotiating billion-dollar corporate contracts. The subservient housekeeper persona vanished into thin air, instantly replaced by the terrifying, ruthless CEO that I truly was. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I ignored my screaming sister completely. I ignored my panicked parents. Instead, I slowly turned my head and locked my eyes directly with Harrison Caldwell. The sheer dominant intensity of my gaze pinned him to his chair. The pathetic family game was officially over. Harrison Caldwell stopped breathing. The aggressive screaming from my sister seemed to fade into absolute background noise as his highly trained analytical mind finally kicked into high gear. Without the visual distraction of the cheap white apron, he was suddenly forced to look at me as a complete equal, or rather as his absolute superior. His eyes darted from the icy, unyielding expression on my face down to my left wrist. The custom diamond Rolex caught the light of the crystal chandelier. It was not just any expensive watch. It was a highly specific, limited edition timepiece that had been mentioned in the frantic internal memos circulating at Vanguard Financial that very morning. The memos detailed the terrifying new majority shareholder who had just executed a flawless hostile takeover of his entire firm. I watched the exact second the devastating realization hit him. The color violently drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly shade of gray. His confident corporate posture completely collapsed. He swallowed hard, his chest rising and falling rapidly as his brain connected the dots. The deep architectural knowledge about the French painter, the incredible multi-million-dollar Aspen estate, the absolute lack of fear in my eyes, despite my sister screaming at me. Harrison pushed himself away from the mahogany table with so much sudden frantic force that his heavy dining chair tipped backward. The solid wood chair crashed loudly onto the polished marble floor, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot through the massive dining room. Brittany immediately stopped her hysterical ranting. She looked up at Harrison, a confused, triumphant smile, briefly flickering across her flushed face. She genuinely thought he was standing up to defend her honor. She thought the wealthy, powerful man she was trying to trap was about to scream at the clumsy housekeeper and demand my immediate removal from the property. "Oh, babe, you do not have to yell at her," Brittany cooed, reaching out to gently touch his tailored sleeve. "My parents will handle it. We will just have her pack her things and leave." Harrison violently snatched his arm away from Brittany as if her touch would physically burn him. He did not even look at her. He kept his wide, terrified eyes locked entirely on me. His chest heaved as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. He took a cautious step away from the table, stepping away from my family and directly into my line of sight. He lowered his head, his shoulders dropping in a gesture of complete and utter submission. He executed a slight rigid bow, the kind of deeply respectful motion a terrified employee gives to a superior who holds their entire future in the palm of their hand. "Madam C.O." Harrison stammered, his voice trembling so badly it was barely a whisper. "I had absolutely no idea this was your private residence." The words hung in the air, heavy and lethal. My mother let out a sharp, confused gasp. My father froze his glass of scotch halfway to his mouth, his brain completely short-circuiting. Jason blinked rapidly, looking back and forth between Harrison and me, as if trying to decipher a foreign language. Brittany let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh, completely failing to process the reality unfolding right in front of her. "What are you talking about?" Harrison Brittany asked, her voice cracking with sudden rising panic. "What do you mean, CEO? This is just Natalie. She is my broke sister. She is a single mother. You are confused." Harrison finally snapped. He turned his head and glared at Brittany with a mixture of absolute disgust and sheer terror. "Shut your mouth right now, Brittany!" Harrison hissed viciously, his polished corporate demeanor completely evaporating into thin air. "Are you completely insane? Do you have any idea who you are talking to? She is not a housekeeper. She is the founder of Apex Holdings. She is the billionaire who just bought my entire company this morning. She is my ultimate boss." He turned back to me, his hands shaking visibly at his sides. "I am so incredibly sorry, ma'am," he pleaded desperately, his professional survival instincts kicking in. I was brought here under entirely false pretenses. I was told this family owned this estate. I had no idea they were treating you this way in your own home. Please believe me, if I had known who you were, I never would have stepped foot on this property without a formal invitation from your office. I value my career at Vanguard Financial above everything else. I glanced across the table at Naomi. She was leaning back in her chair, a look of pure, unadulterated satisfaction radiating from her face as she watched the arrogant men in her life completely fall apart. She gave me a tiny nod of approval. I let the heavy silence stretch out for another painful moment, savoring the absolute terror radiating from the man my family thought would be their golden ticket to high society. I looked at Harrison calmly, assessing his panic before letting a slow, cold smile curve my lips. "It is quite all right, Harrison," I replied, my voice smooth and dripping with quiet authority. "You are exactly right. You were brought here under false pretenses. But you are going to stand exactly where you are because we are going to have a very important discussion about the company you keep and the company I now own." The silence that followed my declaration was so absolute you could hear the wind howling against the bulletproof glass windows of the dining room. Then Brittany threw her head back and let out a shrill, hysterical laugh. The sound was sharp and entirely out of place, scraping against the severe tension in the room. "Oh my gosh, you are so funny, Harrison," Brittany giggled, stepping toward him and reaching out to grab his arm again. "For a second there, you actually looked completely terrified. That was a really good prank, but you can stop now. You are going to give my parents a heart attack. Natalie is not a CEO. She is a broke, single mom who lives in a tiny apartment. She is literally just wearing a cheap apron and cleaning up my spilled wine." Harrison violently yanked his arm out of her reach for the second time. He stared at her as if she had suddenly grown a second head. "I am not joking, Brittany," Harrison said, his voice dropping into a harsh, guttural tone that made her flinch. My father stood up from his chair, trying to force a hearty chuckle to diffuse the rapidly escalating situation. "Now, Harrison, let us not take this little misunderstanding too far," my father said, gesturing toward his empty chair. "My daughter is right. Natalie has always had a vivid imagination, but she is certainly not a billionaire. She does not even have a proper business degree. Why do you not just sit back down and we can open another bottle of wine and forget this whole silly thing happened?" Harrison ignored my father completely. He stepped closer to Brittany, his face pale with a mixture of raw panic and boiling anger. "Look at her wrist," Brittany Harrison demanded, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. "Do you see that watch? That is a custom piece commissioned exclusively for the executive founders of Apex Holdings. There are only 3 of them in the entire world. Do you know how I know that? Because I spent my entire morning reading the new corporate mandate she personally signed to authorize the hostile takeover of my firm." Brittany blinked rapidly, her eyes darting to the diamond Rolex on my wrist, and then back to Harrison. "But that is impossible," she stammered, her voice losing its arrogant edge and dissolving into a panicked whine. "She cannot be your boss. She does not know anything about investments. She is a loser, Harrison. My parents pay for everything she has." "You are lying," Harrison shouted, the sudden volume of his voice making my mother jump in her seat. "You have been lying to me since the day we met. You told me you came from a family of sophisticated real estate tycoons. You told me this was your family estate. But you are nothing but a desperate fraud. She is Natalie, the founder and sole owner of a private equity and real estate conglomerate worth billions of dollars. This estate alone is worth $8 million, and it is registered to a blind trust controlled by her holding company. She does not just own my firm. She owns commercial high-rises in Manhattan, luxury resorts in the Caribbean, and tech startups in Silicon Valley." My father tried one last desperate attempt to salvage his crumbling pride. "Harrison, surely there is a mistake," Richard pleaded defensively. "2 women can have the same name. My daughter was just struggling to pay her bills last year." "Richard, you are absolutely delusional," Harrison snapped, turning his furious gaze toward my father. "I saw her signature on the acquisition documents today. I saw her corporate portrait in the confidential briefing files. There is no mistake. You people are living in an absolute fantasy world." Harrison began pacing a tight circle on the marble floor. Do you understand what you have done to me? He continued, directing his absolute fury back at my sister. I have spent the last 3 months trying to impress the executives at Vanguard Financial to secure a promotion. And you just brought me into the private home of the woman who literally owns the entire board of directors, and you made me watch you treat her like garbage. You intentionally spilled wine on the most powerful woman in our industry. You just committed corporate suicide on my behalf. The sheer force of his anger finally shattered Brittany's delusion. She stumbled backward, her knees hitting the edge of her heavy wooden chair. She collapsed into the seat, her hands trembling so violently that she knocked over her own water glass. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked at me. Really looked at me for the first time in her entire life. She saw the expensive cashmere sweater, the flawless posture, and the cold, unbothered expression on my face. The absolute truth crashed down on her like a physical weight. I was not the family scapegoat anymore. I was the billionaire she had been pretending to be. My mother let out a strangled gasp, pressing her hands against her cheeks, as the reality of the situation began to sink in. She looked from Harrison to me, her eyes wide with sudden, terrifying comprehension. The luxury cabin rental falling through. My casual agreement to let them stay in this massive mansion. Every single piece of the puzzle suddenly snapped into place, forming a picture that horrified her. Naomi leaned forward in her chair, a slow, brilliant smile spreading across her face. Well, Jason, Naomi said quietly, her voice cutting through the heavy tension like a sharpened blade. It looks like your sister really is a self-made woman after all, just not the sister you were bragging about. Harrison stood rigidly near the table, looking at me with desperate, pleading eyes. He was a man watching his entire career burn to the ground because he had trusted a family of absolute frauds. My father was the first to break the suffocating silence. He could clearly see that the massive wealth and influence he had been desperately trying to fake were actually sitting right across the table. He suddenly morphed into the ultimate proud father, his face stretching into a wide, sickeningly sweet smile. Now, Harrison, my father said, his voice dripping with forced warmth as he stepped toward me. There is no need for anyone to panic or ruin a perfectly good holiday dinner. We were simply playing a little family joke on you to test your character. We wanted to make sure you were not just after Brittany for our incredible family wealth. Natalie here is our absolute pride and joy. We taught her everything she knows about the real estate market. She inherited her brilliant business mind directly from me. My mother immediately caught on to his desperate pivot. She pushed her chair back and hurried to my side. I pulled my arm away before she could even touch my skin, but she did not let that deter her performance. Oh, absolutely, my mother chimed in, her voice trembling slightly as she tried to sound like a loving matriarch. Our daughter is an absolute genius, Harrison. We raised her to be a fierce, independent corporate leader. We have always been a deeply close-knit family. We share everything. What is ours is hers, and obviously what is hers is ours. We are all one big happy empire. We just thought it would be highly entertaining to have her play the undercover boss tonight. It was all just a harmless theatrical game. Harrison stared at my parents with absolute disgust. He looked from my father's fake smile to my mother's sweating forehead, entirely repulsed by their shameless attempt to steal credit for the very empire they had just insulted. He felt a deep sickness, realizing he had almost permanently associated his clean professional reputation with these incredibly toxic people. Before Harrison could formulate a response to their pathetic lies, the sound of a chair scraping loudly against the marble floor echoed through the room. Naomi stood up slowly. She smoothed down the front of her tailored dress, her posture radiating absolute authority. Actually, Richard, Naomi said, her voice echoing clearly across the massive dining room. That is not entirely accurate. You are not a deeply close-knit family, and you certainly do not share an empire. As a corporate attorney, I make it my absolute priority to understand the legal and financial history of the people I associate with. And the legal history of this family is incredibly well documented. My father swallowed hard, the fake smile faltering on his face. Now, Naomi, This does not concern you. It concerns me very much, Naomi interrupted smoothly, stepping away from the table. She looked directly at Harrison, speaking to him professional to professional. Harrison, these people did not teach her anything. They did not support her business. In fact, exactly 3 years ago, Natalie went to her parents asking them to simply co-sign a modest startup loan for her very first commercial property. She had a flawless business plan. She just needed a signature. Naomi paused, letting her eyes lock onto my father. Richard here flatly refused. He told her she was a terrible investment. He told her she was going to fail. And then the very next day, he took out a massive equity loan on his own house and bought Brittany a brand new Porsche. He legally and financially disowned Natalie that same week, completely cutting her off from the family trust because he said her single mother lifestyle was a permanent embarrassment to his social standing. My mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Jason buried his face in his hands, completely humiliated by his smart girlfriend publicly destroying his parents. Naomi turned her fierce gaze toward my mother. You did not raise a billionaire CEO, Brenda. You threw out a struggling single mother to protect your fake aesthetic. Natalie built this entire $8 million estate and her multi-billion-dollar company entirely on her own. She did it while you were busy going bankrupt trying to fund Brittany's fake influencer career. So please do not stand in her dining room and pretend her massive success belongs to you. You do not own a single brick of this house, and you do not own a single drop of her success. Harrison looked at me, a profound look of absolute awe replacing the terror in his eyes. He realized the incredible magnitude of what I had accomplished completely alone. My parents stood completely frozen, their desperate pivot violently crushed by the undeniable factual truth. They had absolutely nowhere left to run, hide, or manipulate their way out. Brittany could not handle the suffocating reality of the room. The absolute destruction of her curated lies was too heavy for her fragile ego to bear. Instead of feeling shame, she resorted to pure, irrational aggression. She pushed herself up from her chair, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred, her hands trembling violently. "You set me up!" Brittany screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the vaulted ceilings. "You orchestrated this entire night just to humiliate me. You knew Harrison worked for your company from the very beginning, and you intentionally let us come here just to ruin my relationship. You deliberately trapped me because you cannot stand seeing me happy." I did not move a single muscle. I just looked at her, letting her pathetic accusations hang in the air. "I did not invite you here," I replied calmly. "You broke into my home after your credit cards were declined at a cheap rental cabin. You demanded I put on an apron and serve your food like a peasant. You poured a glass of vintage wine on me to make yourself feel superior. You built your own trap, laid out the bait, and walked right into it entirely on your own." Harrison stood perfectly still, watching the toxic dynamic unfold with absolute clarity. The sophisticated woman he thought he was going to marry was completely gone. In her place stood a spoiled, manipulative liar who had tried to use him as a financial lifeline. He looked at the expensive designer dress she was wearing, suddenly realizing it was likely paid for by the very parents who were now completely bankrupt. "You lied to me from the very first day we met," Harrison said, his voice cold and devoid of any lingering affection. "You told me you were an independent entrepreneur. You told me your family was old money wealthy. You made me believe I was entering a partnership of equals. But you are just a gold digger, Brittany. You have absolutely nothing to offer. You are completely empty inside." Brittany gasped, her eyes widening in pure panic. "No, Harrison. Please," she begged desperately, reaching across the table to grab his hand. "You do not understand. My family is just going through a temporary rough patch. I love you. Do not let my crazy sister ruin what we have built." Harrison violently pulled his hand away, his expression hardening into pure, unyielding stone. "She is not poisoning my mind, Brittany. She is the only person in this entire room who actually told me the absolute truth tonight. We are completely done. I am breaking up with you right here and right now. Do not ever contact me again. I will be blocking your number the second I walk out of this house." The finality in his voice was absolute. There was no room for manipulation. The wealthy man she had spent months deceiving had just dropped her like a toxic asset. Brittany let out a sound that was half scream and half sob. Her face flushed a violent shade of purple. The total rejection fractured her reality. She completely lost her mind. She grabbed the heavy crystal water goblet from the mahogany table and hurled it violently across the room. It smashed against the stone fireplace, sending sharp shards of expensive glass raining down onto the pristine marble floor. "I hate you," Brittany shrieked, stomping her feet like an overgrown toddler throwing a massive tantrum. "My life is completely ruined, and it is all your fault." She grabbed a silver serving fork and looked as though she was about to hurl that weapon as well. My parents scrambled backward, terrified of their golden child finally snapping under the pressure. I had seen enough. The entertaining portion of the evening had officially concluded. I raised my right hand and casually snapped my fingers. The sharp sound cut cleanly through Brittany's hysterical screaming. Instantly, the heavy mahogany doors at the far end of the dining room swung open. 4 men dressed in impeccable black suits stepped quietly into the room. They were my private security detail, highly trained professionals who had been standing by in the wings the entire evening. They moved with terrifying speed and precision, fanning out to surround the dining table, their expressions completely blank and focused. The sudden appearance of the armed guards instantly silenced the room. Brittany's screams caught in her throat. She dropped the silver fork, her eyes darting nervously between the large men. My parents froze in absolute terror, suddenly realizing they were no longer dealing with a compliant daughter, but a powerful billionaire who controlled a private army. They stood perfectly still, their breath caught in their chests, waiting in absolute agonizing silence for my final command to seal their miserable fate. I let the heavy, agonizing silence stretch for a full minute. The 4 security guards stood like stone statues, their eyes locked on my family. The sheer terror in the room was palpable. My mother looked at the shattered glass on the floor, then at the guards and finally at me. Her arrogant facade completely crumbled. The wealthy, judgmental matriarch vanished, replaced by a desperate, panicked woman who suddenly realized she had no money, no power, and absolutely no way out of the mountains. Brenda collapsed back into her chair and covered her face with her hands. When she looked up, tears were streaming down her cheeks. Real tears this time. "Natalie, please." My mother sobbed, her voice cracking with pathetic desperation. "You have to call them off. You cannot throw us out into the blizzard. We are your family. We are your blood." I did not signal the guards to stand down. I simply leaned back in my chair and watched her cry. "You told me on the phone that my children and I were a liability," I reminded her coldly. "You told me we would ruin your perfect family aesthetic." "I was wrong," Brenda wailed, reaching her hands across the table as if trying to grasp my arm, though I was sitting much too far away. I was so incredibly stressed. "You do not understand what we have been going through. We are completely broke, Natalie. The Airbnb rental took the very last of our credit. We have absolutely nothing left in our bank accounts. We do not even have enough money to buy gas for the rental car to get back to the airport. We are drowning. You are so successful now, and you have more money than you could ever spend. You have to help your family." My father nodded frantically, abandoning every last ounce of his pride. "Please, Natalie." Richard begged, his voice shaking. "We made terrible mistakes. We trusted Jason with our retirement and he lost it all. We took out loans for Brittany and we cannot pay them back. The bank is threatening to foreclose on the house in Boston. If you do not help us, we are going to be living on the street. We will do anything you want. Just give us a loan. You are a billionaire. A few $100,000 is nothing to you." Harrison stood quietly near the broken glass, watching the ultimate financial execution take place. He looked at Brittany, who was staring at her parents in absolute shock, finally realizing that her family was not just pretending to be rich, they were actually on the verge of total homelessness. I looked at the 2 people who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. They were finally begging for my mercy. It was the exact moment I had been waiting for. I turned my head slightly and made eye contact with Naomi. Naomi offered a slow, sharp smile. She had been waiting for her cue all evening. She reached down beside her chair and picked up her sleek designer leather briefcase. She placed it squarely on the mahogany dining table. The sharp click of the metal latches echoing in the quiet room sounded like a vault sealing shut. Naomi calmly opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. She did not look at Jason, who was staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. She handed the folder directly to me with professional grace. I took the folder and rested my hands on top of it. "You want a loan," I said softly, looking directly into my father's desperate eyes. "You want me to bail you out of the massive financial hole you dug for yourselves while trying to fund a fake billionaire lifestyle." "Yes, please," my father practically whispered, leaning forward eagerly. I slid the heavy manila folder across the polished mahogany wood. It came to a stop right in front of my father's plate. "Open it," I commanded. Richard reached out with violently trembling hands. He flipped open the cover of the folder. My mother leaned in close, her tear-streaked face hovering over the documents. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Their eyes frantically scanned the dense legal jargon printed on the thick parchment paper. "What is this?" my father asked, his voice completely hollow. Naomi folded her hands neatly on the table. "That is the original title deed to your primary residence in Boston." Naomi stated, her voice carrying the absolute authority of a top-tier corporate lawyer. "Attached to it are the 3 separate notices of default from your primary mortgage lender, along with the aggressive equity loan contracts you signed over the past 2 years. Jason tried to speak up. "Naomi, how could you do this?" Jason stammered, looking at his girlfriend as if she were a stranger. "You went through my parents' private financial records." Naomi turned her cold gaze to Jason. "I did not go through anything privately, Jason. Your parents defaulted on publicly recorded loans. When Natalie told me about your lies yesterday, I simply ran a standard property background check. It took me exactly 5 minutes to discover that you have been lying to me about your trust fund, your stock portfolios, and your family wealth. You are a complete fraud, and your parents are currently holding a folder that proves they are entirely bankrupt." My mother let out a strangled gasp, clutching the edge of the table. "How do you have these original documents?" she cried, looking back at me. "Because your bank finally grew tired of your missed payments and bundled your toxic debt." I explained, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "They sold your loans to a private debt collection firm, and as it turns out, my holding company recently acquired that exact firm." I leaned forward, making sure my words pierced straight through their hearts. "I do not need to give you a loan, Dad. I already own your entire life." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. My father stared at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying combination of confusion and sheer despair. He looked back down at the thick manila folder, resting on the mahogany table. His trembling fingers slowly turned the pages, scanning the formal legal letterhead printed at the very top of the assignment of deed. He read the name of the purchasing entity out loud, his voice barely a raspy, defeated whisper. "Apex Holdings." "You bought our mortgage?" my father asked, his brain struggling to process the devastating reality of his financial ruin. "I bought all of your mortgages, Dad," I corrected him smoothly, leaning forward and resting my arms on the table. "I bought your primary mortgage. I bought the second equity line of credit you took out to pay for Jason's completely failed cryptocurrency startup. And I bought the third massive high-interest loan you secured just to fund Brittany's fake influencer lifestyle and buy her that ridiculous sports car. When your original bank finally flagged your accounts as critically delinquent, they packaged your toxic debt and sold it off at a massive discount to a private acquisitions firm. It is a very standard practice in the financial sector to offload high-risk, non-performing assets to buyers who can handle the collection process. And as we established earlier," Naomi chimed in quietly from her side of the table, "Natalie owns that acquisitions firm." "Exactly," I said, keeping my gaze locked directly on my father. "My portfolio managers flag hundreds of distressed residential and commercial properties every single month. But when I saw your specific Boston address cross my desk, I personally stepped in and authorized the immediate purchase. I did not do it out of the goodness of my heart. I did not do it to save you from your own reckless financial decisions. I did it because it was an incredibly lucrative business investment. You see, your original bank was desperate and willing to take a massive loss just to get your toxic loans off their ledgers forever. But I know the actual current market value of that house. It is located in a highly desirable prime historic district. Once I formally foreclose on the property and evict the current occupants, I can renovate and flip it for a very substantial profit margin. My mother let out a shrill, horrified gasp. Her hands flew to her chest as she stared at me as if she were looking at a complete stranger. "Evict us!" Brenda shrieked, tears of genuine panic streaming down her heavily powdered face. "You cannot possibly evict us from our own home. We raised you in that house. We are your parents. You cannot just throw your own flesh and blood out onto the freezing street. That is completely heartless." "You are not my family right now, Mom," I replied, my voice dropping to a cold, razor-sharp tone that completely silenced her hysterical screaming. "Right now, you are simply my defaulting tenants. And I am your bank. You are officially 3 months past due on every single one of your payment obligations. According to the strict terms of the contracts you willingly signed, I have the absolute legal right to initiate formal foreclosure proceedings at any given moment. In fact, my legal team has the final eviction paperwork completely drafted, heavily reviewed, and absolutely ready to file at the courthouse first thing Monday morning." My father slumped back in his heavy wooden chair. The arrogant, boastful man who had spent the entire evening bragging about his fictional real estate empire was entirely gone. He was nothing but a broken, bankrupt shell of a man. "But Natalie," he pleaded, his voice breaking into a pathetic sob, "we have nowhere else to go. We spent our entire retirement fund. We have absolutely zero savings left. If you take the house, we will be completely homeless." I looked at him without a single ounce of pity or regret. "You should have thought about your retirement fund before you liquidated it to buy designer handbags and luxury vacations for a daughter who treats everyone around her like garbage," I said, gesturing toward Brittany, who was currently sitting frozen in her chair, completely speechless. "You should have thought about your financial security before you handed hundreds of thousands of dollars to a son who refuses to get a real job. You made your terrible choices, Richard. You invested your entire future into the 2 children you deemed worthy, and you actively threw me away because I did not fit your perfect, wealthy aesthetic." Jason looked down at the floor, his face burning with intense shame. He could not even make eye contact with Naomi, who was watching him with absolute disgust. "You are an absolute monster," Brittany finally whispered, her voice shaking with residual anger and rising terror. "No, Brittany," I corrected her softly, offering a cold, victorious smile. "I am just an incredibly successful businesswoman, handling a very bad investment. You wanted to play rich all night. Now it is time to pay the bill." Harrison stood silently near the broken glass, watching the sheer brilliance of the trap I had sprung. He witnessed a masterclass in corporate execution applied directly to toxic family dynamics. He knew without a shadow of a doubt exactly why I was the CEO of Apex Holdings. Every single person in this room was finally learning a very painful lesson. You cannot constantly disrespect the person who secretly holds the keys to your entire existence. My parents had foolishly gambled their entire livelihood on keeping up appearances, but they forgot one crucial rule. The house always wins, and I am the house. The silence was finally broken by the one person who had spent his entire life hiding safely behind my parents. Jason suddenly pushed his heavy wooden chair back and stood up. His face was flushed with a pathetic mixture of deep embarrassment and wildly misplaced rage. He looked down at my parents, who were still staring blankly at their devastating foreclosure documents, and then he pointed a aggressively shaking finger directly at me. "You are completely out of line, Natalie," Jason yelled, his voice cracking slightly as he tried desperately to sound intimidating. "You think just because you have a lot of money now, you can treat your own flesh and blood like absolute garbage. You are actually sitting there enjoying this. You are acting like some ruthless corporate dictator, but you are just being incredibly cruel and vindictive. These are our parents. They made some unfortunate financial mistakes, but they absolutely do not deserve to be humiliated and thrown out onto the freezing street by their own daughter." You need to call off your lawyers right now and fix this massive mess before you destroy this family forever. Jason puffed out his chest and quickly glanced sideways at Naomi, clearly expecting her to look impressed by his sudden aggressive display of dominance. He genuinely believed that standing up to me would somehow miraculously salvage his entirely shattered masculine ego. He truly thought he could successfully twist the narrative and make me the ultimate villain, proving to his brilliant, high-powered lawyer girlfriend that he was a man of fierce loyalty and solid moral high ground. But Naomi did not look impressed. She looked at him with the cold, analytical detachment of a scientist, observing a highly disappointing and defective specimen under a microscope. Naomi slowly pushed her own chair back and stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not yell or scream like Brittany had done. She did not need to. Her absolute terrifying composure was far more destructive than any loud tantrum could ever be. "Sit down, Jason," Naomi commanded, her voice slicing cleanly through the heavy dining room air with chilling legal precision. "Do not embarrass yourself any further tonight. You are not bravely defending your family. You are simply panicking because your personal automatic teller machine has finally been shut down permanently." Jason froze in place, his false bravado instantly evaporating into thin air. "Naomi, baby, please just listen to me for a second," he pleaded desperately, reaching out across the table to touch her arm. "I can explain all of the financial stuff. It is just a temporary cash flow problem. We can easily get past this together." Naomi pulled her arm back immediately, as if he were carrying a highly contagious and deadly disease. "There is absolutely nothing left to explain," she replied smoothly, keeping her posture perfectly rigid. "I have spent the last 6 months of my life listening to you arrogantly brag about your massive investment portfolios and your exclusive trust fund. I sat there and watched you talk down to waitstaff and valets because you loudly claimed you were part of the elite upper class. But you are nothing but a lazy parasite. You selfishly drained your aging parents' retirement accounts to lease luxury cars you could never actually afford. And when they finally ran out of cash, you happily watched them steal from your own sister just to keep your pathetic, hollow charade going." Naomi reached down to her left hand. She grasped the expensive diamond promise ring Jason had proudly given her just 2 months ago. He had sworn to her that he paid for the jewelry with his latest massive startup dividend check. Now she knew with absolute certainty that it was likely paid for by a desperate third mortgage on a house that was currently being foreclosed on by the woman sitting across the table. She slid the sparkling ring off her finger in one swift, fluid motion. She stepped closer to Jason, holding the diamond directly over his crystal wine glass. She opened her fingers and let it fall. The heavy ring dropped into the dark red vintage wine with a sharp, incredibly final clink. "You are a 33-year-old man who lets his parents steal from his sister, Naomi," stated coldly, delivering the ultimate killing blow while maintaining absolute unwavering eye contact. "I do not date spineless frauds." Naomi turned away from him without waiting for any kind of pathetic response. She looked directly over at me and offered a brief, highly respectful nod of silent solidarity. Then she gracefully picked up her expensive designer briefcase from the polished mahogany table, turned sharply on her high heel, and walked out of the dining room without ever looking back, even once. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind Naomi, sealing the ruin of my family inside the dining room. Jason stood paralyzed next to his chair, staring blankly down into his wine, where the diamond ring rested at the bottom of the crystal glass. He had just lost the only genuinely successful and intelligent person who had ever loved him entirely because of his own pathetic greed. He sank back into his seat, burying his face in his hands, completely broken. Brittany remained frozen on the other side of the table. The violent tantrum had drained out of her, leaving an empty, terrified shell. She was staring at the empty space where Harrison had been standing just moments before. The wealthy executive she had planned to marry was gone forever. Her fake influencer career was exposed as a complete sham. She had no safety net, no rich husband to bail her out, and no parents to drain dry. The extravagant life she believed she was entitled to had evaporated into thin air. My father looked like he had aged 20 years. He sat slumped in his heavy mahogany chair, his eyes still locked on the thick manila folder containing his imminent foreclosure documents. The arrogant patriarch, who loved to lecture everyone about his brilliant business acumen, was now just a terrified old man facing total bankruptcy and homelessness. And then there was my mother. Brenda slowly looked around the room, taking in the absolute destruction of her family. She looked at Jason crying silently. She looked at Brittany staring blankly at the wall. She looked at the 4 massive security guards standing silently in the corners. Finally, she looked at me. The reality of her situation hit her with the brutal force of a freight train. There was no money left. There were no hidden bank accounts. There was no luxury cabin in the woods. They had absolutely nothing. Brenda slid off her chair. Her knees hit the polished marble floor with a heavy thud. She did not care about her expensive designer dress or her carefully styled hair. For the very first time in my 34 years of life, my mother was crying genuine, desperate tears. They were not tears of manipulation or theatrical performance. They were tears of absolute, profound terror. "Natalie, please," Brenda sobbed loudly, crawling forward slightly on the cold stone floor. Her hands shook violently as she looked up at me. "I am so incredibly sorry. I was so wrong about everything. I treated you terribly. I was just so stressed about maintaining our lifestyle that I completely lost my mind. Please, you have to forgive me. I am your mother. I am begging you." I looked down at her feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no sadness, just a profound sense of closure. When her apologies failed to elicit any emotional response from me, Brenda desperately reached for her final trump card. She tried to play the role of the loving grandmother. "Please, let me see Leo and Mia." Brenda begged, her voice cracking as the tears streamed down her face. "I just want to see my grandchildren on Christmas. I bought them presents before our credit cards stopped working. I want to hold them. I want to apologize to them, too. You cannot keep a grandmother away from her grandchildren on a holiday. Please, Natalie, just let me see the kids. It will make everything better. We can be a real family again." I stood up slowly from my chair, towering over her kneeling form. The air in the room felt incredibly thin. I looked down at the woman who had happily discarded my children just a few days ago because they did not fit her wealthy aesthetic. "No," I replied, my voice completely devoid of warmth. "You are not going to see my children. Not tonight, not tomorrow, and not ever again." "But they are my grandchildren," Brenda wailed, pressing her hands against the floor. "You told me on the phone that my kids were messy," I reminded her, keeping my tone perfectly even and sharp. "You explicitly said that my single mom aesthetic and my chaotic toddlers would completely ruin the perfect image you needed to project for Harrison. You said they were a liability to your flawless family facade." I swallowed the slight lump in my throat, ensuring my final words were delivered with absolute lethal precision. I looked down at her tear-stained face, feeling completely detached from the woman who gave birth to me. "I am simply protecting the aesthetic, Mom," I said. "My children will never be exposed to the toxic, bankrupt reality of this family. I am giving you exactly what you asked for. Now get up off of my floor and get out of my house." I turned my back on my kneeling mother and nodded to the lead security guard. The order was given silently, but the execution was immediate and absolute. The 4 massive men in black suits stepped forward simultaneously, their movements entirely synchronized and highly professional. They did not shout or make any threatening gestures. They simply grabbed my father by his arms, hauling him up from his heavy mahogany chair with effortless strength. Another guard reached down and pulled my mother off the polished marble floor. "Get your hands off of me!" Brenda shrieked, kicking her expensive heels wildly in the air as the guard lifted her like a child. "We have nowhere to go. You cannot do this. We will freeze to death." The lead guard did not even blink. He escorted them toward the grand foyer, their protests echoing loudly against the vaulted ceilings. Jason did not put up a fight. He simply stood up from the table, his shoulders slumped in absolute defeat, and walked out of the dining room on his own accord. He looked completely shattered, a hollow man who had just lost everything he mistakenly thought he owned. Brittany, however, was not going down without a final hysterical performance. When the last guard reached for her arm, she lashed out violently, attempting to slap his face. "Do not touch me, you giant ape," she screamed. Her face flushed a dark, furious red. "Do you know who I am? I am an influencer. I will ruin this entire security company." The guard easily dodged her flailing hand, grasped her firmly by both shoulders, and physically marched her out of the room. Her shrill voice faded down the long hallway, overlapping with my mother's desperate sobs and my father's pathetic pleas. A few moments later, the heavy sound of the massive front doors opening and slamming shut resonated through the estate. The cold winter wind had officially swallowed them whole. My private security team had successfully evicted my toxic family out into the freezing aspen night. I stood completely still, letting the sudden profound silence wash over me. The heavy, suffocating tension that had plagued my life for 34 years was finally gone. It was just me, the shattered crystal on the floor, and Harrison Caldwell. Harrison had pressed himself flat against the far wall of the dining room, desperately trying to stay completely out of the way of the massive security detail. Now that the room was clear, he slowly peeled himself away from the wall. He looked absolutely terrified. The confident senior director who had walked into my home just a few hours ago was completely gone, replaced by an employee who was absolutely certain he was about to be fired. "Madam CEO Harrison," stammered, taking a slow, incredibly cautious step toward me. "I cannot even begin to express how deeply sorry I am for this entire horrific ordeal. I swear on my entire career I had absolutely no idea who she really was, or what her family was capable of. I was completely manipulated. I would never intentionally disrespect you or bring chaos into your private sanctuary. Please believe me." He stopped a few feet away, his head bowed in complete submission. He was literally shaking. I looked at the man who had inadvertently handed me the ultimate stage to exact my revenge. In a strange way, I owed him a minor debt of gratitude. He was the catalyst that finally brought their massive house of cards crashing down. "I am well aware that you were manipulated," Harrison Frey replied, my voice calm, but laced with absolute authority. "You are an intelligent corporate director, but you clearly suffer from a severe lapse in personal judgment when it comes to the women you choose to date. You let a shiny facade blind you to the toxic reality underneath. That is a dangerous flaw for someone handling millions of dollars of client investments." Harrison swallowed hard, nodding rapidly. "You are entirely correct, ma'am. It was a massive oversight on my part. I will be far more rigorous in my personal life moving forward. I just pray this horrific mistake does not permanently end my tenure at Vanguard Financial." I looked down at the dark red wine stain on my cashmere sweater, then back at him. "Let us make one thing absolutely clear, Harrison. Your personal life is your own business. But the moment it spills over into my private estate, it becomes my business." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle heavily onto his shoulders. "We will discuss your severe lapse in judgment and your future at the firm on Monday morning in my office. Have your performance metrics ready. Now get out of my house." "Yes, ma'am," Harrison said quickly. "Thank you, ma'am. Merry Christmas." He practically sprinted out of the dining room, desperate to escape the estate before I changed my mind and fired him on the spot. The front doors clicked shut one final time. I was finally completely alone. I stood in the center of the dining room, listening to the absolute silence that followed the heavy click of the front doors. For the first time in 34 years, my chest felt completely light. The suffocating weight of my family's constant judgment, their endless demands and their toxic manipulation had completely vanished. It was as if a massive dark cloud had finally been lifted from my shoulders, leaving behind nothing but pure, unadulterated peace. I looked down at the shattered crystal and the dark red wine staining the polished marble floor. It was a messy reminder of the chaos they had brought into my home, but it was also a beautiful symbol of their permanent departure. I would have my cleaning staff take care of the mess in the morning. Tonight, I just wanted to breathe in the total freedom I had finally secured. I turned away from the ruined mahogany table and walked slowly out of the dining room, As I stepped into this grand foyer, I noticed a warm glow coming from the formal parlor. I walked toward the open archway and stopped in surprise. Naomi had not left the estate. She was sitting comfortably in one of the plush velvet armchairs by the massive Riverstone fireplace. Her designer winter coat was draped casually over the back of the chair, and she was holding a fresh cup of hot tea. She looked up as I entered the room, her expression completely calm and relaxed. "I thought you called for a private car to take you to the airport," I said, walking over and taking a comfortable seat on the leather sofa opposite her. Naomi took a slow sip of her tea and offered a genuine warm smile. "I did consider it," she replied, setting the delicate cup down on the wooden coffee table. "But then I realized that all the commercial and private flights out of Aspen are completely grounded until tomorrow morning due to the severe blizzard outside. Besides, sitting in a freezing airport terminal on Christmas Eve sounded incredibly depressing. I figured the billionaire CEO of Apex Holdings might have a spare guest room for the corporate lawyer who just helped her execute the most flawless family eviction in modern history." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It was the first time I had truly laughed all evening. "You are more than welcome to stay, Naomi. In fact, I would be highly honored to host you for the holidays. You handled my brother with absolute perfection tonight. It takes a very strong, highly intelligent woman to walk away from a toxic relationship without a single ounce of hesitation." Naomi leaned back in her chair, the flickering firelight reflecting in her dark eyes. "I have worked way too hard to build my legal career to let a spineless fraud like Jason drag me down," she said firmly. "And honestly, watching you dismantle your parents' entire false reality was the greatest masterclass in corporate strategy I have ever personally witnessed. You did not just break their delusion. You legally and financially dismantled their entire toxic existence. They will never be able to manipulate, belittle, or hurt you ever again." We sat in a comfortable, deeply respectful silence for a few long moments. We were two incredibly successful self-made women who had just ruthlessly cut the dead weight out of our respective lives. We did not need their validation, and we certainly did not need to pretend to be anything we were not. The heavy burden was gone. Suddenly, the quiet, peaceful atmosphere was broken by the joyful sound of small, rapid footsteps echoing from the top of the grand staircase. The heavy oak doors of the private cinema had opened, signaling the end of the holiday movie marathon. I stood up and walked to the base of the massive staircase just as Leo and Mia came bounding down the carpeted steps in their matching pajamas. Mommy Leo shouted happily, his face glowing with pure excitement. The movie was so awesome. Santa Claus flew his magic sleigh right over the big snow mountains. Mia giggled loudly, practically launching herself from the bottom step directly into my waiting arms. "Santa is coming," she cheered, burying her small face into my shoulder. I caught her easily, wrapping my arms tightly around her warm little body while Leo hugged my legs. I closed my eyes, breathing in the sweet scent of their shampoo. They were completely safe. They had not heard a single violent scream. They had not witnessed a single broken glass. And they had absolutely no idea that their toxic grandparents had just been permanently exiled from our lives. They were pure innocent and completely untouched by the darkness that had relentlessly haunted my own childhood. "I am so glad you loved the movie, my sweet angels," I whispered, kissing the top of Mia's head. I looked over at Naomi, who was watching us from the parlor archway with a soft, deeply affectionate smile. This was my true family. It was not defined by blood or legal obligations. It was defined by pure love, deep respect, and the fierce desire to protect each other at all costs. The storm was officially over, and our real Christmas was just beginning. I led Leo and Mia into the formal parlor where Naomi was already waiting. The massive Riverstone fireplace crackled loudly, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. The contrast between the violent blizzard raging outside the bulletproof glass windows and the absolute serenity inside the house was breathtaking. I had my staff bring in fresh mugs of steaming hot cocoa piled high with fluffy marshmallows, and we all settled onto the thick rugs right in front of the roaring fire. Naomi seamlessly joined in, laughing genuinely as Mia tried to balance a marshmallow on the end of her nose. watching a high-powered corporate lawyer sitting cross-legged on the floor, playing with my children as if she had known them her entire life, solidified everything I had come to realize that evening. We did not need my parents or my siblings to make this holiday special. We had everything we could ever possibly need right here, safe and secure from the toxic madness outside. The towering Christmas tree in the corner was decorated beautifully, with silver and gold ornaments glowing softly under the ambient light. I walked over and pulled out the first few presents wrapped in shimmering paper. The next 2 hours were filled with nothing but pure joy. There were no tense whispers, no passive-aggressive insults disguised as jokes, and absolutely no walking on eggshells to appease a fragile ego. Leo tore into a massive building block set he had been begging for, while Mia squealed in delight over a new interactive storybook. I even had a small wrapped gift for Naomi, a vintage leather portfolio I realized suited her sharp aesthetic perfectly. She opened it with genuine surprise, her eyes shining with real gratitude. She told me it was the best Christmas she had experienced in years. I felt exactly the same feeling, a deep warmth that had been missing for so long. As I sat back on the plush rug watching my children laugh and play in the safety of the fortress I had built for them, I allowed myself to fully process the massive shift that had just occurred. For 34 years, I had allowed society and biology to dictate my worth. I had believed the lie that because we shared the same blood, I owed them my unconditional loyalty, even when they treated me with absolute cruelty. But looking at the empty space in my life where they used to be, I did not feel a single ounce of grief. I only felt a profound sense of liberation. Family is not determined by an accident of genetics. Blood simply makes you related, but consistent respect, mutual support, and unconditional love are what truly make you a family. I had lost a highly toxic, draining group of people who only saw me as a scapegoat or a financial lifeline. But in the process of walking away from their crushing expectations, I had built a massive corporate empire, and more importantly, a real home filled with genuine peace. My children would never have to experience the heavy, suffocating pressure of being the golden child or the agonizing pain of being the discarded one. They would grow up knowing that their worth is absolute and completely independent of anyone else's approval. I had broken the generational curse of conditional love with a single snap of my fingers, and I was never going to look back. The empire I built was impressive and incredibly lucrative, but the absolute peace of mind I secured tonight was easily my absolute greatest achievement. If you are watching this and you are trapped in a dynamic where you are constantly made to feel less than you are, listen to me carefully because this truth is vital. You do not owe your peace of mind to anyone just because you share a last name. You do not have to shrink yourself to make other people comfortable. Setting firm boundaries is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of necessary self-preservation. Never let anyone make you feel small at your own table. You have the power to walk away, to build your own safe haven, and to surround yourself with people who actually celebrate your presence. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have ever had to make the difficult decision to cut ties with toxic family members to protect your peace, please share your experience in the comments below. We gain strength when we realize we are not alone. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of reclaiming your power. Remember that you are the author of your life, and you hold the pen. Stay strong and always know your true worth. The story we just experienced highlights a profound and difficult truth about human relationships and the true definition of family. Often, society conditions us to believe that we must endure toxic behavior simply because the people hurting us share our DNA. We are constantly told that family is everything, even when that exact family relentlessly undermines our self-worth and drains our spirit. Natalie's journey completely shatters that dangerous myth. For decades, her parents and sister treated her as a convenient scapegoat, dismissing her inherent value and demanding her absolute submission just to uphold their own selfish illusions of grandeur. But Natalie realized a vital lesson that we all need to deeply understand. Enduring abuse and disrespect is never a requirement of love. By walking away from her family's constant belittlement, she was able to build an incredible empire, and more importantly, a peaceful sanctuary for her own children. Her story powerfully teaches us that true family is built on a solid foundation of mutual respect, unconditional support, and genuine care. Blood simply makes you related, but consistent respect is what actually makes you family. If a relationship requires you to shrink yourself, hide your success, or sacrifice your dignity just to keep the peace, it is absolutely not a relationship worth keeping. Letting go of toxic people, even the very parents who raised you, is never an act of cruelty or selfishness. It is a deeply necessary act of self-preservation and profound self-love. We are the ultimate authors of our own lives, and we hold the absolute right to decide who gets a seat at our table. Please share this video with someone who might need the courage to set their own healthy boundaries and reclaim their peace today.